Well, I think the fact that President Xi Jinping of China and President Obama of the United States have agreed to meet and to have done so on such short notice and to do so outside of Washington is a very smart move, and I think also bespeaks of both of their concern that the U.S. China relationship should not wait another 6 months for a formal presidential meeting elsewhere. And I think it'll provide a very sort of healthy environment because it will escape all of these kinds of sort of rigid requirements of meeting in Washington, where everybody's done up in neckties and suits and there's 21-gun salutes, protocols, state dinners, all the rest of it. So I think this would be an opportunity for them to get to know each other better, to actually talk informally and perhaps in a somewhat straighter manner than they would in another venue. And I'm hopeful that if anything can actually be done to reset the relationship, as both presidents protest they would like to see happen, I think this gives as good a chance as any venue to have that come to pass. But I think for them to be in the same place, for 2 days in this sort of setting that begs a certain informality is quite unprecedented and also not characteristic of what Chinese leaders tend to strive for, because very often in a society such as China, where protocol is so important, all the deferences of status and fear of losing face and all of these things that ritual and very structured meetings provide is something that they have rarely foregone. So over the last 10 years, we haven't really seen anything like this with President Hu Jintao. So we'll see. But I think it's a good sign that Xi Jinping is a different sort of a person. Well, I think in general terms, both leaders have expressed a concern to try to elevate the U.S. China relationship to some new level of understanding. And they look back to the sort of Nixon, Kissinger, Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai meetings, which were 1972, with a certain wistful nostalgia, because they recognized that was the last time when leadership really mattered in such a significant way and the relationship was recast. So I think they'd like to do that if they can. But there's much baggage, complicated histories, many issues that divide. And I think the issues that probably will be front and center will be, I think, first of all, America's pivot to Asia. Is this containment? Who's it aimed at? Are the Chinese right or wrong in assuming that they are being hemmed in? I think the United States is very interested in winning more support from China in its effort to sanction North Korea and to make the costs of nuclearizing North Korea higher. And I think actually here it's somewhat hopeful. China does seem to be much more amenable, much more worried than it did a year or two ago about the nuclearization of North Korea. I think the island conflicts, Japan and China and the Philippines, Vietnam, these are very worrisome. I think, in this environment of the Sunnylands estate, which is very congenial, golf course, tennis courts, swimming pools, it will afford them the possibility to discuss things that would be a little bit more of an affront if brought up in a very formal setting in the White House or between, a very stratified sort of negotiating setting. I think there are certain issues like closing down of websites of certain American media outlets, denying visas to journalists, the question of treatment of certain kinds of artists or media figures in China who have had their freedom of expression curtailed. These things are always going to be difficult because they sort of depart from the fact that we have very different notions of free expression, very different notions of what the role of the media is, art, culture in society. So I think we can't expect to make a whole lot of progress on those issues. But I think both presidents now have a very keen recognition that whatever divides us, there's a host of really important questions which cannot be solved without U.S. Chinese cooperation. And those are just as much interests for each country as they are interests for the world. And so I think that means that there's a greater willingness than perhaps before to say certain things we can't deal with now, we can't resolve, but that shouldn't prevent us from dealing with other things. You have climate change, world trade, world health, pandemics, things like this. The U.S. and China have to put their shoulder to the wheel of these problems, or there won't be a solution. I mean, I think we probably won't have any major demonstrable breakthroughs immediately. I think what we should look for is sort of some symbolic signs of yielding on certain critical issues. They may not come in a press announcement at the end of the summit, but they may come in the days that follow. And most important, I think, is for President Obama and President Xi to take each other's measure and perhaps to become more comfortable with each other and to recognize that there are things that when one side criticizes the other side, it isn't simply to score points, it's to say, we've got to do something about this because it impedes our ability to do something about other more important issues. And I think that's the challenge of these few days in June.